But you know what else it's good for is people who have high blood pressure because it has no salt in it. So if you're on a very strict no sodium diet, it's...
All right, we're going to start. So I'm going to start on 157, which I think is the front page, the top page of your packet, and go quickly through the last two paragraphs because we did those last time, and then continue on to the next page. So I'm on the third paragraph on page 157. If you remember, Elijah had just come to them and told them to get out of the cave. So they come out of the cave. This is the first time they come out of the cave. This is Rabbi Shimon and his son Elazar. Nafku, they come out of the cave. Chazu inashe deka karavi vizari. So they saw two people. They saw people that were planting and sowing. So they were farming. Amar, they said to themselves, Manichim chaye olam v'oskin b'chaye sha'ah. So they forsake eternal life, and they engage in the life of the time, the life of the hour, which means temporal stuff, technological society. They should be studying like us in the cave and just meditating and praying, and instead they're working, they're farming. And that fills them with anger and resentment that the human beings haven't evolved to the point where all they can do is pray and meditate and study, and that's what they think is the ideal for a human being. And they say here they're farming. So wherever they would look, it would burn up right away. So their anger turns into actually a physical force, and wherever they look, they burn up. So then a voice from heaven now comes and makes this judgment. Are you trying to destroy my world? The my world is important there too, because God says that's my world too, the people farming. Just like the world in the cave you think of as God's world, actually God's world is much more, well, it includes much more than that. It includes farming and technological society and making a living. Chizru l'maretchem, go back to your cave. So and the idea is that you're not worthy really to be in my world. You have to go back to your world, the cave, which now seems to us as a very limited world, just a place where they're avoiding technological society. They're avoiding the rest of the world. They bury themselves up to their necks in sand. Hadur azol itive tresa yarcheshata. So now they spend 12 months there. And it becomes clear it's a punishment. Amre, they say to themselves, Mishpat Rishaim Begehinam Shnemasar Chodesh. That people that are sentenced to Gehenna, to hell, are only sentenced there for 12 months. That's an interesting sort of metaphysical fact you may not have been aware of. But if you're sentenced to hell, you're only sentenced there for 12 months, and then you go on to the next stage of existence. That's why we say Kaddish, by the way, for a year. We say Kaddish for a year because that's the maximum sentence. The maximum sentence is the most wicked person is only sentenced there for 12 months. And you say it for 11 months because you assume that the person that you're praying for can't possibly be that bad. Right? I mean, that would be an insult. If you would pray if you would say Kaddish the entire 12 months, that would be insulting your relative because you would be saying she must have gotten the maximum sentence. So none of our loved ones got the maximum sentence, so we say Kaddish for 11 months.
Suppose you have someone who thinks you should be saying it.
You're free to continue, but that's your business, and you'd be publicly proclaiming that. Anyway, so now they're saying we're here now for 12 months, and that's the maximum sentence. In some ways, really recognizing that now the cave is a jail. Before it was paradise, now it's a jail, and understanding that they're being punished for something, which maybe they're starting to understand what for. Yatzta bat kol v'amra, and now a voice comes, tsumi maratchem, so the voice affirms, yes, it's enough time, go out of your cave. Nafku, so they go out, kol hecha dahavi machi Rabbi Eliezer, havi masi Rabbi Shimon. Now this odd thing happens. So Rabbi Elazar is still this fanatic who is filled with rage when he sees people farming, when he sees anything outside their cave. That's a technological manifestation. Anything that's not what he considers holy and godly, he destroys. But Rabbi Shimon heals now. Rabbi Shimon has come to the point of view that all is holy. And so he's able to heal what Rabbi Elazar destroys. And he says to his son, Amar lo b'ni, dai la'olam ani v'ata. It's you and I now are sufficient for the world. It's very interesting. So does he mean that that's all we need in the world? Like we had in the cave, you and me, that's enough for all time? Or is he saying, what you destroy, I heal, and we can go on like that forever? I'll leave it at that. Bahade, Panaya Demale, Shapta, Chazu Hahusava, Dahavinaki Tre Benade Asa. So now the sun was setting. It happens to be on a Friday. And so the sun is setting. It's almost Shabbat. And I see this old man. It's carrying 2 myrtle branches. V'rahit ben hashmashot, and he's rushing. Why is he rushing? Because it's Shabbat. Shabbat's coming, hasn't come yet. Amrule, Hane lamalach. So they ask him, why are you carrying those myrtle branches? Amar le lechvod Shabbat. I'm carrying them because of Shabbat. I'm decorating my house for Shabbat. I'm bringing my wife flowers for Shabbat. They're a way to adorn Shabbat. Okay, a lot of interesting things in this. Interesting facts. He's rushing. Part of what they object to is all this rushing. They never had to rush when they're in the cave. Right? When they're in the cave, everything is slow. Everything's perfect. Everything is exactly at the right time. There's no need to rush. We're going to rush now. Their existence is exactly the same every day. But this guy's rushing because that's real time. Real time is that you go from place to place, and life doesn't slow down for you. You have to kind of greet life. But he's also rushing because Shabbat's important to him, and the sun is setting, and he wants to get home before Shabbat because he wants Shabbat to be his kind of cave. So he understands you can go back and forth from the cave to real life. So he's carrying on lichvot Shabbat. V'tizge lach bechad. So why not just one myrtle branch? Because that would be decorative enough. Why two? Chad keneged zachor, v'chad keneged shamor. Because they both correspond to two words in it's the Ten Commandments, which you also have in L'chad Odi. But the two versions of the Ten Commandments, one in Shemot, one in Dvarim, one says zachor, remember Shabbat. One says shamor, which means keep Shabbat. Now, it's different wording in those Ten Commandments. So in the Chad Odi, we sing Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad, that Shamor and Zachor actually were said simultaneously. And God uttered one thing, and we heard both words at the same time. So he says, I have two myrtle branches for Zachor, one for Shamor, the two ways of keeping Shabbat, remembering Shabbat, but also observing Shabbat. But to me, the duality is important too, although it's just hinted at here. The fact he's got two indicates that it's possible, really, that the sacred life is assimilating both forms of existence. One, the life in the cave, which is a life of meditation and prayer and retreat from technological society, but also the world of work, technological society, making a living. I've got both in my hands. I'm putting them both together. And I have Shabbat in order to, every week, I have both. I'm able to exist simultaneously in both worlds. And the two, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar, felt that it's an abhorrent thing to want to live in the outside world. You've got all of it all the time right now. Remember, that's an impossible existence. They're buried up to their necks in sand. They only eat because of God's grace, because of a miracle. No people can really exist that way. So it's the old man that tells them the lesson. You can exist in both worlds simultaneously because of Shabbat and really because of the mitzvot. You can incorporate holiness into your life every week, in fact, every day. Because it stops here. This part starts, Amar le'levarei. So Shimon tells his son, Chazi kama chavivim mitzvot al Yisrael. Look how much Jews love their mitzvot. Yatev da'atayo. So their minds were eased. So this is what they learned. They learned that you can have both. You can have the world of the cave, and you can have technological society, the world of work, and Shabbat allows you to merge both of those existences.
So in a way, that's one of the more unusual things about Judaism, because we don't have hermits or people who just go away and study and not be part of the world.
Yeah, and in fact, this is a story that explains why we don't. Right. Like that world in the cave, which other religions, may think of sort of the height of spiritual existence. Right. For us, for them, it becomes a punishment. Right. It becomes weird and awkward and strange. And when they come out, they become destructive forces. So the story doesn't like it.
Right.
Right. The storyteller doesn't like that. The storyteller wants them to learn the lesson. Don't live in a cave. You have to live out in the real world. And the way you'll get your spiritual needs is through Shabbat and through mitzvot. And that way you can live in both worlds simultaneously. Right. And that's Judaism.
And that's the challenge, really, for all of us. To live in both.
Right.
So I've always understood that the custom to halot on Friday night is because the Jews received 2 portions of manna on Friday. And now I'm wondering if it also has a relationship to Zachor, Shamor.
I think the dualities are all through Shabbat. So you've got the 2 challahs, right? You've got the 2 candles. What do you do in Havdalah? Havdalah, you have a braided candle. Well, it's a braided candle. It's 2 candles coming together. So you've got these dualities. So the dualities are represented by a bunch of different. There's a lot of of symbolic significance to the dualities, but one is, yes, we are braiding together. I mean, remember, challah is braided too. So you've got the braided challah, and you've got two of them. So we are taking these two elements of human existence, the spiritual element, where you're directly in contact with God, and the work, and we are bringing them together. And that's why we bring them together in Havdalah. You bring them together in Havdalah to show that just because I'm leaving Shabbat now doesn't mean that I'm entirely leaving my cave. I take something with me. That's the spice box too. So you're inhaling, the fragrance, which is the pure spiritual world of the cave of prayer and meditation, and you take it with you during the week. And it's the braided candle of Havdalah, which signifies the most important element, which Martha talked about just a second ago, which is we don't retreat into a cave. We take that cave with us all the time. If you retreat into that cave, you become awkward and strange and violent. And that's not that's not the religious personality we're building in Judaism. Although there are people that think it is. But this story is a critique of that, and it's in the Talmud.
How did the monk way of life insert itself into Christianity?
Well, I'm not an expert in that. But you have elements of that already in the Bible. So you've got prophets, Elijah, Elisha, that are retreating totally from their technological society. You've got the Nazir, who retreats. So they take those elements and they build this kind of religious ideal of a person who retreats, and that's the holy man. This story really is a critique of that. It's saying those people that retreat into the cave, they come back and they just want to destroy. They have to learn their lesson. I mean, this is a story about engaging with the world with spirituality, not retreating from the world. All right, let's keep going. And actually, that idea becomes really prominent later in the story. So let's finish right now. So 158. Shema Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, Chataneh, hu nefak la'apeh. Okay, so now Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, his son-in-law now comes to him, and comes to see him. It's very interesting. So they come out of the cave, and then it's 12 years in 1 month, and sorry, it's 13 years altogether. It's 12 years plus another year, and so who comes to greet them? His son-in-law. So who's not there? Like his wife. I've always wondered that, but I was reading this again. I was thinking, where's the wife? Now, you remember, they worry about the wife. He worries about the wife. Because the reason they hide in the caves is because they think, well, that might torture my wife, and she'll give us up. And maybe she got killed by the Romans. Doesn't say, she never appears again. Maybe they tortured her. And he didn't escape in order to save her, and he doesn't take her with him to the cave. There's something very odd about this guy, Shima, too. He's not worried about his wife's safety. He's worried that his wife is going to give him up. Yeah. So now we have his son-in-law that comes to greet him. All right.
Yeah, not his daughter.
Yeah, not his daughter. Right? Yeah. I mean, there wasn't the internet in those days. I mean, how did word spread that he got out? Somehow the son-in-law hears. Maybe the wife hasn't heard. It's an argument from silence. I have no idea what happened to the wife. I do know the wife doesn't appear again in the Talmud. So, anyway. So anyhow, Pinchas Yair, who was a prominent rabbi, in his own right. So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair arranges for a massage. He takes him to the bathhouses because he figures he's been physically suffering for all that time. It's 13 years. And he saw he has all these sores on his body. So he has all these sores on his body because he buried himself in sand up to his neck every day for 13 years. So all these sores. Now it's interesting. So when we read this at first, that he buries himself up to his neck in sand, you're thinking this is this pure spiritual existence, and he's able in some ways to transcend the body. All he is his head for 13 years. But the fact is that we learn now he was never able to transcend the body. There was a cause. There was an effect. There was a cost. For all that sand, and it hurt his body, and he's got all these sores. And Havi Kabache, and Pinchas Yair sees these sores and he starts crying. That must hurt, and he feels bad for him. And tears flow down his cheeks, and they cause him pain. Who's the him? Obviously, they cause Shimon pain. We had this idea that great emotions cause physical damage. And somehow the tears of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, the son-in-law, cause Rabbi Shimon pain. Now, it could easily be emotional pain, but you have this idea also they cause him physical pain. He's physically hurt by seeing those tears, maybe feeling the tears. Anyway, so Pinchas Yair says, Amarlo, oili sharaiticha bekach. Woe is me that I see you like this. Amarlo says back to him, Ashrecha sh'ritani b'kach. Happy are you that you see me like this. Now you have one of the great kind of gnomic statements that you have in the Talmud that you kind of have to really look at it. Almost it's so clipped and short, but there's so much there, and it's like almost like Zen. There's a Zen quality to it. So I'm going to read it carefully in Hebrew, and then we'll translate it again. So Ashrecha sh'ritani b'kach. Happy are you to see me this way. She'ilmale lo ri'itani b'kach. Because if you hadn't seen me thus, lo matzata b'kach, you wouldn't have found me thus. If you hadn't seen me thus, you wouldn't have found me thus. Happy are you that you see me like this, because if you hadn't seen me like this, I wouldn't be like this. Now, Steinsaltz has to unpack that and tell us what it means. But it seems to mean something like, I'm exactly how I should be. And your subjective experience of this is sad, but I want you to consider that I'm exactly how I should be. Because if I wasn't like this, I wouldn't be like this. I'm exactly where I should be right now at this moment. Because that's where life has taken me. And you think it's sad that I should be exactly where I am at this moment, but in fact, there's an order to my life, and which is governed by all sorts of forces. And when I consider the order of my life, I am right now exactly where I should be. Which, by the way, is filled with sores and in pain. Okay. So, nobody's commenting on this, right?
No, I'm wondering if there's also an element of
brutality.
No.
Yeah, it is.
Like self-righteousness, because these are the signs of my suffering, and therefore I'm greater than.
So you're reading that into it.
That's what I'm.
You're reading into it. It's good that I suffered, and you could say that too. Remember, he doesn't say that exactly.
Right.
Okay, so he could be a little more precise about what he means. He could say, look, the suffering really helped me. I learned a lot in the experience. It was a growth experience for me. The Talmud now interprets it. You'll see how the Talmud and see how Steinsaltz interprets it. But if you just read the phrase in its raw form like that, the idea is that life gives you exactly what it's supposed to give you. It's like, I am now in the place where I should be. And if that place is sad and painful for me, it's only because that's what's meant for me right now. Now, that doesn't sound like a very Jewish thing to say. It does sound very Eastern, though. It does. I mean, you hear elements of Eastern religions in it. And the guy was in the cave for 13 years, and it seems to be something that came out of that cave experience. I am now fully accepting of all experience right now. It's all kind of the eternal present for me. And so I'll tell you one quick teaching I just read recently, and then I'll move on. I mentioned this on Friday night, but so there's the Sfat Emet, a Hasidic thinker, the Graubart Rabbi, comments on the word Seder. So the word Seder, which is what we do on Pesach night, right, the Seder. So what does that word mean? It means order. So why do we call it that? We call it that because we do everything in a particular order. We lovingly sing out the table of contents. Kadesh Orachatz. I mean, it's a love song. Like the table of contents is like this love song because we love the structure and the order so much. So, and he says that the order is really important. We call the same thing. We call the name of the ceremony the order. We love the order. We love the rigid order. Everything has to be exactly in its right place. But he says, so this is how you should think of life. He says that everything you are experiencing right now is not happenstance. It's happening at exactly the right time. It's in a particular order. And he says, so look at the slave experience for the Jewish people. And he says, all through the Seder, we are thanking God not just for the liberation and the Exodus. We are actually thanking God for the slavery experience. And the people that were slaves in Egypt for those 400 years, that was their time to be slaves. It was exactly in the right order. And they should be thanking God exactly for that experience, because it's exactly where it should be. So, and he says the people that were slaves, that was their time to be slaves. The people that were liberated, that was their time to be liberated. There's an order to human history. There's an order to your own human existence. And so now, is that comforting for people? I can tell you that the Graubart Rabbi lived in a terrible time. He did. I mean, he lived in a time of terrible oppression, and he's telling us people, this is what's meant for us right now. If we wait it out, I mean, there's an arc to history, there's an order to history, and right now is our time to suffer, and it's where we should be right now. Something good is going to come of it. Yes. And the rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto, the Eish Kodesh, read that It was one of his teachings, and he said the same thing. So there are times in the life of the individual and in human history where that can be comforting. It's an interesting idea. Where I am right now is where I should be.
But how does that track with a person trying to change it?
So the Holocaust was
that's what he
part
says.
of the order, right?
That's what he
So
says.
we should
Yeah.
accept it.
But does that take...
So he's saying there's an arc in history that the Exodus is part of sort of the dialectic laws of history that start with suffering and end up in redemption. And if you're in suffering right now, ultimately it's going to bring you to redemption.
Well, Rabbi, does that change things as far as what you're trying to improve your lot? Or
No, I think you still try to improve your lot. It's just where you're at right now. Look, we can't spend the whole time talking about this. It's a very interesting topic. I personally I don't think it changes. I think you still try to change things. You still try to,
Right, it's still your job.
Yeah, it's still your job. But you develop. I think there's wisdom in the sense that you develop an acceptance of who you are and what you're going through right now. At the same time, you can aspire to something more. You can combine those ideas, because there are some things you can change and some things you can't change. So you try to understand what you can't change, and accept that.
So how do you deal with the hard time when you're going through it? You don't just give up. And you don't just pray, you act in a certain way.
You accept some of it?
You accept some of it,
Right.
the things that
Yeah.
you can't change,
Right.
but there are people who tried to have a Seder in ghettos,
Right.
in concentration camps,
Yeah.
and you can read about them.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of milieu from which Messianic thinking arose, though. It's a different approach.
Because it's passive. Say, we'll just live with what we've got right now and wait for the Messiah to come. Yeah, it's true.
Right. But one of the ironies is the Haggadah is the one book that has so many versions, as opposed to the prayer book or the Torah or whatever. A Haggadah, which is order.
Oh, I see what you mean, order, yeah.
Order
Yeah.
has
Also, keep in mind how does Haggadah end?
Okay.
So you've got this, and I think I think there's some Jewish wisdom in what the Rebbe said there. What the Sfat Emet says is that that history moves in a particular order, and you may be stuck at a certain place right now, but in fact you're not really stuck because history is always moving. And right now you're in a place where you should be. There's something interesting and I think moving about that. Think about how the Seder ends. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Remember that there's still a dynamic in us, in history, in you, that's moving forward towards redemption next year in Jerusalem. So although we accept history in its proper order, ultimately we have faith, and this is a statement of faith, that it's moving in a positive direction. So that's the answer to you do have that faith that it's moving in a positive direction. It certainly is your responsibility to kind of help move it in that direction, but understand what you're going through right now is also what you're meant to go through. So you're going to learn something from it. You're going to take something from it. Let me finish. Let's see what he takes from it, and then we're probably out of time. So now this is the Talmud. So first he says that, kind of that nomeg zen utterance, where it's good that you see me where I should be, because if you didn't see me where I should be, I wouldn't be where I should be. And now the Talmud explains it. Dimi akra, because before the experience in the cave, ki have makshe Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai kushya, when Rabbi Shimon would ask a question to Pinchas ben Yair, his son-in-law, have mifarek le Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, so Pinchas ben Yair would give him tresar peruke, would give him 12 answers. So before the cave experience, Rabbi Shimon was the teacher, and he would shout out a question to his student, who was also his son-in-law, and the son-in-law, who's very bright and understands Jewish ways of thinking, would understand there's not only one answer, there's 12 possible answers, and he would give 12 answers, and that was their relationship. That was also a sign of Pinchas ben Yair's great intellect and also Shimon's ability to formulate questions. But now, lasof, after the cave experience, Ki have makshe Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair kushya. When Pinchas ben Yair would ask a question, have mifarek le Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai esrim va'arba peruke. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai now would answer 24 answers. Yep. So two things happen. One is that Shimon bar Yochai, who starts the experience as the teacher asking questions, is now the student. He's now the student who's receiving questions from his former pupil, from his son-in-law. So that's really interesting too. The cave experience helped him, right? It helped him evolve from being a teacher to being a student, because being a student is a higher spiritual level. That's what the cave did for him. It also enabled him to be a better student, because he's able to give 24 possible responses. So it opened his heart. It opened his soul, expanded his soul. So he could see more possibilities. He could see 24 answers, where before Pinchas could only see 12. But also he became the student. And the student always has an open mind. And he became a student with even a greater open mind. So that's a really interesting way of describing spiritual growth. You go from being a teacher, which is a low-level spirituality, to being a student, which is a higher-level spirituality, open to more possible answers, open to more possible intellectual experiences.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
I always thought teachers were the opposite.
There's a couple there's a few stories in the Talmud that indicate that you're at a higher spiritual level when you're a student than when you're a teacher. Interesting. Okay. All right, we'll do a little more. Amar. So Shimon now says, because there was a miracle made for me. The miracle is all sorts of things. The escape, he was able to escape. It was the 13 years where the Romans didn't catch him. But also remember the carob tree where he gets food, and also the magical well, the spring of water where he's able to drink. So he says, because there was a miracle made for me, Ezil atkin milta. I will go and I will fix something. You have the word tikkun there. I'll fix something. This is a classic idea. God did a miracle for me, so I'm going to fix something. And this is tikkun olam. But, well, you see. So, dichtiv, because he's got a verse that shows that's what you're supposed to do. Because God does a miracle for you, you should now look at the world. By the way, this is the world that he despised just a little while before, but now it's a world that he loves in all of its manifestations, and I will go fix something in the world. And his inspiration for that is this verse, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem, because Yaakov comes to, now it's a play on words. It's the city Shalem, but it's also Shalem means Jacob emerges whole, right? Shalem meaning whole. This is after Jacob's terrible experiences, being chased by his brother and being chased by his father-in-law, and he ends up in the city Shalem, but also that he becomes Shalem whole. Amar Rav, Shalem begufo, Shalem b'mimono, Shalem b'torato. So Rav interprets that he's whole in his body, whole in his fortune, his mammon, his money, and whole in his teaching, in his Torah. And then vayichan et pnei ha'ir. So therefore he gave grace to the city. He did a favor for the city. So they interpret that as meaning because Jacob emerged from his trial in good shape, he's going to pay back the city where he ends up in, which was Shalem. Amar Rav. So now the rabbis say, what did Jacob do? Matbei tiken lahem. He gave that city coins. He used his Jewish brain to give them a system of a coinage, a whole monetary system. Yeah, a whole monetary system. So, which, by the way, is the ultimate of engaging with the world. Right? This is not somebody who despises the world. This is somebody who understands the need for commerce. So actually, he sets up a system. This is Jacob, but it's also Shimon Bar Yochai's inspiration. Jacob gave that city a monetary system so they could engage with the world, and I'll do something like that. Also, Shmuel said, Shvakim tiken lahem. So Shmuel says he gave them marketplaces. If you remember the beginning of the story, which seems like months ago, but at the beginning of the story, the fact that they have marketplaces is exactly Shimon's critique. That's what's terrible about the city is all the marketplaces, because the Romans just put them up so they could get prostitutes. Now suddenly he's looking at Jacob as a model. Why? Because Jacob set up marketplaces. He's a total reverse now from where he starts in the story. So here also we see his growth. Before he was a teacher, now he's at a higher place as a student. Before he despised the material world, now he understands the value of the material world, and in fact he's he makes contributions to the material world. Okay, we'll finish it next week.